All right, moving over to the middleweight division now. We got Dante Johnson coming in at minus 650, going up against Cody Brundage, who comes in at plus 475. Now, Dante Johnson is 7-0. Add that 7th win to his record in his UFC debut back in November, where he was able to get a second-round submission victory over Cedricus Dumas. Now, that was a fight where we saw Johnson go into the second round for the first time in his career, and his cardio looked fine. It seemed like he dealt with the grappling onslaught of Dumas early pretty well. There was a moment where he was, on his knees alongside the cage defending the grappling of Dumas, and his coach was just telling him to get up, and Johnson was like, hey, calm down. I got this. No need to worry. I'm going to eventually work my way to my feet, and at that point, Dumas is going to gas himself out, and that's where I'm going to get better success with my style of fighting. And that's exactly what happened. Johnson eventually worked back to his feet. Dumas started sucking wind, throwing crazy, weird, flashy strikes that was taking way too much energy. And then come the second round, we saw Johnson get that guillotine choke and quickly force the tap from Dumas. And it seemed like as soon as Johnson got his arm around Dumas's neck, Dumas was just ready to tap. And it was just a matter of Johnson finding the right angle to torque enough. And that's where we saw Dumas end up tapping out. But Johnson is a guy that normally brings his explosivity with his power and getting his opponents out of there quickly. That's how he was able to earn his contract with the Contender Series, by knocking his opponent out within the first minute and a half. And he's a fighter that relies heavily on that athleticism and that explosivity to get a lot of his wins. That's why, the majority of his career he spent at heavyweight and light heavyweight, because of that speed and power that he can bring and, obviously get the better of his opponents that way. But he knew once he made it to the UFC, he wasn't going to be able to get away with that type of disadvantage in the size and length that he'd be going up against in terms of talent as well. So he cut down to middleweight, a cut that doesn't seem all that too hard for him. He was able to make the switch pretty quickly from his Contender Series fight being fought at heavyweight down to that middleweight debut in November. And I think this is the best division for him. But he's still yet to be tested against somebody that's going to be able to deal with that power early. Have a good enough cardio game to go into the second and third rounds and muzzle that power of Johnson. And maybe Cody Brundage is the guy. Cody Brundage, as much as people want to call him soft and flaky and all that, this guy doesn't say no to anybody, apparently. He's gone from fighting guys like Bo Nickel to Cam Roston to Eric McConaughey, Dalja Lungiambula from back in the day as well. This guy's fought the who's who at middleweight. Obviously not the guys that are in championship contention, but he'll take any and all challenges. But he's had, no contest to Abdul Razak Al Hassan. Then he got that crazy knockout in a war against Julian Marquez. Then he went to a draw against Mansour Abdul Malik. Then he lost that close split decision against Eric McConaughey. And then he got absolutely worked by Cam Roston back in January, where he eventually got TKO'd in the second round of that fight. Brundage comes from a wrestling background, and that's what he tried to assert a lot earlier on in his career, but now he kind of just brings the fire with the power that he has in his hands by marching his opponents down and trying to land big shots to get them out of there that way. There are times where he'll still try to sprinkle in the wrestling when he can, but it doesn't seem to be all that effective at this level. So as much as we want to rag on him about him being a little bit of a quitter at times, or a guy that probably doesn't deserve a UFC roster spot, you got to credit him for being able to take some of these short notice spots, like the one this weekend where he steps in for Duško Todorovic. I believe he came in on a short notice against Cam Roston as well. I could be off on that, but there have been multiple short notice spots where he stepped in and provided entertainment. He has fight of the night type performances, even if he comes out on the losing end. So he's willing to go in there and have wars, but if he can't have that success in the first round, it often seems to him, seems like he starts to fall off with his efficiency, and opponents are able to take over that way. Just as we saw in the Bo Nickel fight, right? Many people expected Bo Nickel to run over him in the first round, but he got Nickel into the second round and, made Nickel work for that finish, even though the finish eventually did come. Now, here against Dante Johnson, this is easily the toughest fight in Johnson's career. say what you want about Brundage. Brundage won't go away easily from Johnson's explosivity and power. And that's kind of why I like the over 1.5 at plus 165 here. I think Brundage will try to make this a little bit grindy with his grappling and his wrestling. And I think we're going to see both these guys exchange some big shots. But once Johnson starts thwarting whatever Brundage does to him, I think we'll see Johnson start bringing that heat in the second round or the third round, and then eventually find the knockout there. But even at that point, you can't fade a guy like Brundage with minus 650 with a guy that's never been tested in the mixed martial arts world. Maybe Brundage can eat those big shots and throw big shots in return that Johnson hasn't eaten in the past. That's definitely something to consider here. So I would stay away from the minus 650 on Johnson. I'm not advising to lay the plus 475 on Brundage either, but the spot that I'm kind of leaning on is the over 1.5. I think we'll see a bit of a grind here early, and I think that'll eventually lead to a finish for Johnson in the second or third round. But I don't want to take that chalk. I'll be interested in what the round props look like for Johnson, but the over 1.5 is probably where I'll end up putting something down. But I like Johnson. I like him to win inside the distance, but over that 1.5 round mark.